You are now listening to the audio preview of The Bonding Agent, written and read by Jeremy S. Loomis. Chapter 1, The Opening. Sublimes exploded in the pre-dawn sky, staining the clouds with patriotic bursts of crimson. This was the hour when agents had to rise. The self-starters would already be out of bed with bright eyes prepared for the electromagnetic spectacle. Not every day began with such festivity. This hour was normally heralded by the first work bell, but the sight of sublimes brought the populace a complicated sense of hope and stirred thoughts of heroism in their hearts. It was challenging for most agents to explain or explore their own deep emotions regarding sublimes, so those feelings were often left unshared. But the overseer made certain that his workers saw such public displays with some regularity. Throughout the compound, one door opened, and another, and another. As the early rising custodian pressure-washed the front walk, a droopy-eyed man stepped off from the top step and glided to the ground, with his weighted boots only halfway secured. When his pads both alighted on the ground, his left leg slid out of its unsealed boot, and he fell over at the base of the stairs. A co-laborer descended the stairs after him one at a time. "You suit up properly before you leave the door!" he shouted, whipping his left arm shackle and chain downward to clank against his friend's only equipped boot. He waited while the clumsy man righted himself and correctly sealed his footwear, but quickly lost patience. "Let's get away from the stairs, you're in everybody's way!" A first-level watcher appeared above their heads. "Are you well this morning, agents?" "He left the compound with no seal on his boots, sir." The watcher regarded the clumsy man. "We are trained to respond to oversights like this. No one is going to drift off into oblivion. Have you taken a lesson from this false move, agent?" The sleepy man nodded. "Good, good," the watcher affirmed. "You'll do better tomorrow. Have a productive day, agents." And he drifted away to supervise the morning commute. "I hate when they show up above us," said the sleepy man. "I know," said the other. "It's the worst." By now, the custodian had spot-checked the main walk, nearly all the way from the compound to the dispatcher's office. For a moment, he ceased his cleaning to stare off-path as a crying baby came into view from the other side of an isolated plateau in this otherwise flat landscape. A baby was a rare sight here to start with, especially one so young. This one still had glaring luminescent skin and appeared to be no more than 20 pounds. The custodian heard the distracted humming of a feminine voice and looked up to spot a rifter. "Oh, good morning, Marilyn," he said. "Pleasant morning, Link," she called down absently as she set a charge. "Finally got a conclusive report, I guess." "Yeah," she called down. "They got back to me. There's no less than 3 tons of cobalt inside this one." "You're kidding me," Link called out. "I want some." "Ha! Get in line," she said, as she dismounted from the rock wall and floated smoothly to the ground in her cobalt thigh-highs. "My warehouse responsibilities would take maybe a third the normal time if I had those," Link remarked. "It's the ceiling work mostly. They try to say just get down the way you went up, but it really doesn't work that way." "Believe me, I understand," said Marilyn as she hefted her baby up into her arms. The infant ceased its shrieking almost instantly as she rested its head against her breast. Tiny fingers reached toward the shackle that hung from her neck. She swatted the little hand away from her chain, but allowed it to latch onto the stitching of her V-neck. She walked toward the dispatcher's office as Link followed along, his eyes scanning the walkway. "Even the watchers," she said, "they're jealous of—" Boom! Link and Marilyn exchanged a surprised glance, turned and watched as mega chunks of cobalt ore fell to the earth like massive snowflakes. "Oh, right," Link said with a laugh. "That was supposed to happen." Now the baby was sleeping, and maintaining a death grip on its mother's shirt. Marilyn continued, "As I was saying, before my work interrupted me, the Watchers are eagerly awaiting official approval on the full-body cobalt gear proposal. But I'm still the only test subject, and the tests aren't finished. We'll see what the Overseer decides." As they arrived at the dispatcher's office, another first-level watcher came out the door to meet them on foot. "What a lovely day, agents," he said. "And hello, Link. Well, understand that somebody is getting fitted for a first-time shackle this morning. Will this be on the neck or the wrist?" "It's a girl," Marilyn said. The watcher nodded and encircled the infant's neck with his black gloves. His expert hands closed in until there was no more give between his fingers and her throat. The baby girl was still asleep, so he kept his voice low. Her neck is just above a 2.5, so we'll set her up with a 3 for now. When should I need to get her resized? Asked Marilyn. A legitimate concern, the Watcher replied. First-time mothers often suffer fears of their babies outgrowing their shackles, suffocating in the night, depressing things like that. But the shackle circuitry transmits various kinds of information to us, among which is your daughter's changing body mass. So we know to contact you when it's time to come back to us for something new. Something bigger and better, as they say. Link's eyes drifted to the path behind them and watched as hundreds of agents snatched up chunks of cobalt rubble on their way to receive the day's assignments. In a moment, the explosion site would be cleared of transportable debris. Link would run the industrial vacuum, call a driver to tow the load, and then the explosion of the plateau would be wiped away from the collective consciousness. He turned his gaze back to Marilyn when the baby started crying again. We'll keep close watch over her, the Watcher said, taking the sobbing infant in his arms. You see to your assignments, and you can have her back when you turn in your day's work. Link saw the discomfort on Marilyn's face as she gave over her child, and it wasn't a look that had come over her only in this moment. An unnatural turbulence had fallen on her and never lifted, ever since the top-secret assignment that the Overseer had had her for, shortly before her pregnancy. The Watcher disappeared indoors with the daughter. Marilyn went off to busy herself with a new day's tasks, and Link scanned the grounds to see what was in the most urgent need of cleaning. He considered the blacksmith's workstation, a stone's throw from the dispatcher's office, and directly beside the depository. Smitty's area was a mess, but that was almost always the case. That was the nature of his work. Link would see if he wanted a clean sweep, but not until day's end. Link stayed in motion, scanning the grounds for litter. When he reached the edge of the latest quarry, he spotted something terribly unusual. He was quite sure that it was not what it appeared to be, until he drew close enough to make out the shape of fingers. He stepped cautiously from one rock to another, hoping that no one had been injured and forgotten during yesterday's jobs. After very nearly drifting off the edge of a loose rock and into the pit, he steadied himself and saw the whole thing clearly. He turned pale and cold. At Link's feet were a shackle, a chain, and a human hand chopped off at the wrist. He was afraid to move. Everyone knew how volatile the circuitry could be when the shackle became separated from its chain for any length of time. But then, this shackle was rolling back and forth on its side, in a rocky depression on the quarry slope. It was off the chain, but still near it. Evidently, the shackle and chain had not become aggravated, because the hand was intact. He was still nervous to touch it, on the off chance of an electromagnetic discharge. It was not his personal dream to become a sublime. Link recalled that he had cleaned up bloody spills before. This blood had clearly had an ample chance to dry. The man must have escaped in the night. Unless he was still hiding in a quarry corner. Whoever this agent was, he had found a way to get off of his shackle and chain and escape without being traced. By that alone, he had won Link's deepest respect. "If you're still down there," he whispered over the pit, "I hope you make it out of here." Kneeling down, Link wrapped the man's hand in a rag and placed it in the satchel he carried for litter. He thought twice about this, but told himself that it was fine. No one had ever once asked to look in his satchel, and it was covered with a heavy flap that wouldn't open on its own. He took a deep breath, grabbed both the shackle and the chain, and hid them away beside the man's discarded hand. Link drew another anxious breath and wondered if he could manage to get through the warehouse to a hiding place without betraying his own nerves and arousing the Watcher's suspicions. Probably he could. Most of them were pretty dumb. Chapter 2, End of Day. It was too easy. Link found himself standing in the warehouse's custodial supply room before he had even had a chance to work out a plan to get there. He had felt nervous the entire time, but barely anyone looked at him on the way, and no one who looked at him seemed to notice that anything was off. But now that he was here, he realized what a bad hiding spot this was for keeping a second-hand shackle and chain. Nearly everything in here was regularly accessed by someone beside himself. He decided instead to keep these secret items in his own personal quarters. There was the matter of his room being in the same building and on the same floor as the overseer's new quarters, but something like this was worth the gamble. Something was finally worth the gamble. Link relaxed and stepped back out of the supply room with his hands in his pockets and a spare in the sack. He picked up a broom near a man who was restocking items for the pickers. The man had a utility knife attached to his chain, and presently he was using it to cut open flaps on a box of crystals. The man looked up as he came near. "Link, my boy," he said with a bow. "Dennis," Link said, giving a quick bow to the restocker. "You all right today?" "Not too bad," said Dennis. "You know, it is what it is." "I've slowly come to find that that is always the case," Link affirmed. "Hey, so about that box you just sliced up, I've noticed they've been using up these parts but not replacing them. You know anything about that?" Dennis turned from the picker's shelves and faced the pallet. There were only 2 boxes left. No, I don't. But I'm glad you bring it up now. These won't last me past lunch. I haven't even thought to ask about them." "I'm sure you won't be in any trouble," Link said. "If anything, they'll just reassign you. Probably just opening boxes for a different restock section." "I guess I could get used to something like that." Link almost laughed aloud, but he saw that Dennis's concern was unfeigned, so he cut himself short. "Do you know what these parts exactly do?" he asked. "I suppose they're just a small part of a complex device, right?" "Well, it's a good question," Dennis said, his face slightly reddening. "Can't say I've thought that far into the process, though. I hate to admit it, but I'm kind of useless for information today." Link looked him in the eye. "You're not useless, Dennis. You just don't know some of the same stuff a lot of other people don't know. I better make the rounds. I hope you have a good afternoon." As he swept on by the picking inspectors, Link considered who in this grand operation might be the one to ask about the parts and the products. He looked up and spotted one of the watchers on the upper floor, taking in all the ground-level goings-on with his inky black eyes. Link realized that he hated the watcher enough to kill him. And that made him uneasy. He didn't want to live with murder as an aspiration, nor did he wish for it to become part of his past. It unnerved him to consider how such a pervasive desire had even found a way to touch his heart. He walked the full length of the assembly line, on which tiny crystals and wiring segments were being attached to miniature circuit boards on flexible strips. The sight was familiar, but its meaning remained a mystery, despite all the observational access he had always had as the custodian. He was quite sure by now that these final products were not composed of pieces that got made or mined within the overseer's domain. In passing, he watched glassworkers forming finely braided translucent strands into rings, usually no larger than the circumference of an orange, but occasionally as big around as a cantaloupe. Link had yet to develop so much as a hypothesis as to why these similar-looking devices were seemingly sized at random, and yet with precise attention to detail. He watched as quality control agents ran tests on the cooled glass, gently fitting flexible circuit board strips snugly within the braided rings. What was the Overseer's grand operation leading up to? Why did nobody have a clue? Link replaced a couple of trash bags for the quality control agents. The reject piles were filling up at an unusually heavy rate that day, and he hauled the bags to the disposal chamber. As he pulled down the locking lever and pulled open the round chamber door, he thought to wonder where all the refuse was removed to after being thrown into this chamber. He poked his head and shoulders into the dark opening to see how far back this industrial dumpster went, and whether it also went up or down for any considerable distance. But it was too dark to see beyond his face. I'll have to remember to bring a light. The work bell rang, and all Shift 1 agents cleared out for lunch. Link nearly dropped his satchel into a cubbyhole in the lunchroom entryway before remembering its singular contents. He stepped into the men's restroom before going in for lunch, and upon confirming that this room was empty, decided it was safe to steal another peek at his treasures. But as he caught sight of the shackle once more, his stomach churned. "No," he muttered, "there's no way in hell." He thought of every day that he'd watched component parts being assembled in the warehouse, and he considered the size that a metal encasement would need to be in order to contain the braided glass circuitry. He realized that he'd forgotten what a shackle looked like when separate from a host. The ring around his wrist had ceased to be a ring shape in his mind. It had become just a part of his arm. This whole underground operation, this minor existence that masqueraded as an elite society of covert operatives, this whole thing was all about putting a chain onto new agents and maintaining enough fresh inventory so that no agents could get a break from being shackled, even for the occasional major hardware update requirement. Though his arms felt nearly like they were floating, in the pit of his gut there was a great weight. This weakened gravity felt like a lie. Link's hands shook as he closed the flap of the satchel and swung the bag onto his back once more. He leaned over the sink and tried not to vomit. He held his hand to his chest and gripped the base of a necklace that he kept hidden within his shirt. This slowly worked to calm him down. When the nausea subsided, he looked at his own exhausted face in the mirror, and the pain welled up in a way that it never had before. He covered his face with his hands and screamed. Suddenly, the restroom door opened, and an awkward giant of a man leaned in cautiously from around the corner. The overseer. "Link," he whispered in his chipper way, "are you all right? You look almost like you turned the color of white. What can be done?" Not in the mood for this. Ever. Link had to think quickly. "Sir," he said, making very sure that his eyes flashed with enough panic. "You see a lot of stuff. I mean, that's your job. I really need to know the truth about something." "Link, you can ask me anything. You know you always can." "Well, then I will ask. Sir, are ghosts real?" The overseer looked down and met Link's eyes with his own vacant and flat blue eyes. These were a shockingly vivid, frosty blue, but in terms of expression, they may as well have been painted on closed eyelids. Link had never remotely sensed the resonant connection of humanity in the overseer's gaze. In fact, it had never stopped being weird just to be able to have conversational interaction with this defective machine of a man. "Did you see one?" the overseer asked. "Yeah. Or I thought I did." The overseer adjusted his lanky stance and smiled with his top teeth. "No," he affirmed for Link, "there's never ghosts. And if it were true, I would have seen them, and I would have kept you and the other agents safe. But you will never need to be afraid of them, because there's never going to be ghosts. Now, how does that sound to you?" Link nodded. "That sounds great. Thank you, sir, for what you do and for who you are. I think I can work without being tormented now." "Then my work here is done," said the overseer, and gently rubbed Link's right shoulder. Then, with an oddly aggressive lunge, he pulled Link in close for a hug. Link managed to slump a little and avoid full body contact, but regardless, this hug lasted longer than anyone with a rightly functioning mind would have intended. Link was sure that his cover was blown because the overseer's hands now wandered slightly across the satchel on his mid-back. "You know I'm always right here, Link." "I know," a muffled Link spoke into the overseer's thorax. "You can come to me if you need anything," the overseer said. "Even when the problems aren't real, I can make those go away." Link managed to free himself from this close encounter without being given a satchel search. He entered the vast lunchroom, picked up a pre-filled food tray, and scanned the floor for an empty table. There was Smitty, alone at a table for two. Link caught his eye, and each gave the other a friendly bow. Then Link spotted another small table, this one empty, and he sat to eat. The food didn't taste like anything today. In his mind, he was miles away from here. Link had to wonder if anyone would miss the Overseer, if he one day disappeared. For just the glimmer of a moment, he associated this thought with his earlier thoughts of violence toward that Watcher. This time, he could not bring himself to care. He didn't see it as the same thing, somehow. If someone were to put an end to the Overseer, well, how different would that really be from taking the battery out of a watch? No, there was no available anchor point in this scenario for compassion to latch onto anything. Link did not care. But the thoughts categorically disturbed him for his own sake, so instead of these thoughts, he listened to the conversations that enveloped him. One table was full of factory workers, listening in awe to some expert who was explaining how he consistently managed to stay 1,000 units ahead of quota on assembly line labor. Link tuned it out. "Nothing we can do about it right now," came the unsettled voice of a subdued man to Link's right. He hadn't caught the subject that the man was discussing. Then he realized that it might as well have been anything at all. After lunch, Link walked out with his satchel on his back and prepared himself for an afternoon of nervous boredom. The factory was never messy. There were rare days on which he would push a broom all around the main floor and still end up with no pile for the trash. Even the compound was too sterile to warrant employing a second custodian. Somehow it fell to him to clean house for all these people, and somehow that was not a heavy burden. "Hello, Link," said the voice of a watcher as Link exited the building. This one had on little glasses that made him look like a fool. The lenses were thick, round, and red, and only just large enough to obscure his eyeballs. Maybe he was trying to look futuristic. He was succeeding in standing out in the crowd, if nothing else. "I like your bag. What do you keep in a bag like that?" Link looked him right in the lens. "Usually just the nasty stuff," he answered. "Like whenever someone has an accident and I have to clean up blood. I'll wrap it up tight and dispose of it when I'm near the approved receptacles." "Well," the Watcher answered, "I suppose my point is, I want a bag like that." Then he got excited and reached into his pocket. "Oh, I may have something for you to put in there. Do you take used tissues? Those can get nasty, I've discovered." Oh no," the Watcher said, making a fist. "I forgot it inside, on my table. I'll have to get it later." "Okay, Link." "Yep. Out on the south corner today. There's some nasty stuff that we do need you to clean up. Or at least we need you to go verify if there's a mess or not." "Oh, right, the sublimes this morning," Link muttered. "I don't know how that slipped my mind. Will you be able to get to that today?" "Yeah," Link answered. "I have time right now." As he approached the south corner of the Overseer's domain, Link noticed one obvious exit. Rather, he saw a way that a man with no shackle and chain might opt to make an escape, and meet with success in doing so. Almost nothing was here. No workers were ever put on assignment here, and thus no watchers were posted to monitor them here. All that was here, apart from barren ground, was the river. The river, with its powerful current, would be a swift means of escape from this wasteland, though he could not imagine where the pervasive current might lead. He sat by the river and let his weighted boots rest just above the waterline. The waterline. The water had always been beautiful to him, but he was ill at ease to watch it anymore. Even in his fairly recent childhood, things had never been this bad. The river water appeared to remain confined to its place by some obligation apart from gravity. Horizontally, the current was strong, but this body of water, in ways difficult for even the eyewitness to describe, seemed to have lost its integration with itself. In the old days, there was this negotiable solidity innate to the liquid state. Now, to be liquid meant that you were in a perpetual state of leaving yourself faster than clouds must form. Link held his right hand out in front of him, and the end of his chain dropped into the drink. He regarded his shackle. "I hate you," he whispered. The 3 tiny windows of shatterproof glass lit up in bright red on his shackle. Link whipped his chain up out of the water and rolled backward. "No, what did I do?" He stood and watched with widened eyes as the lights blinked on and off in rapid sequence. Blink, blink, blink. Blink, blink, blink. Blink, blink, blink. Blink, blink, blink. Then they all remained at a sustained dimness. Then they stopped. Was it from the water? He didn't know whether to tell the overseer about this incident, or to simply stay away from the river and hope for the best. Maybe the chain was just violently uncomfortable with running water. Link was always off the chain when he was bathing, so this incident did indeed present untested variables. He did not want to become a Sublime. Link carried his vacuum around to the exact spots where the explosions had detonated that morning, and he checked the area for collectible residue. The ground there was stained. It always was when this happened, but he found no soft chunks, fortunately, and he found no tough chips. Blackened dust particles chased each other on this slight and balmy breeze, and some of them made it to the river, but nothing really needed to be tended to here. He decided to stay put and think for a bit. It made him a little sad whenever he had to remember that he'd lost the ability to feel anything toward the Sublimes. In his mind, he still couldn't work out why so many of the other agents cheered when the desperate agents would drop their chains and run, but in his heart, it made some sense. Nobody here had anything to call their own. As it turned out, a people could indeed be taught to believe that their work would bring fulfillment in life, but belief often stood at odds with experience, and unsurprisingly, the disparity was more than enough to lead good agents to embrace any way out. Everybody knew that they couldn't stray far from their chain before it would call them to return. They knew by now the fullest extent of the chain's reactive violence. Most people wouldn't leave the same room if they had their chain off. Not unless they had made the decision to free themselves from the mortal coil, and so what began as a tragedy turned into a celebrated cultural norm with which the Watchers would not intervene. In a strange way, the Sublimes gave the other agents hope. It was a dark hope, but sometimes it could feel almost like a light, just to know that if the burden of one's career ever became too much to bear, it remained an option to clock out early. An agent really could find relief. Other people did it, so it was true that anyone could. It had become so commonplace by now that the other agents knew exactly how long they'd have to wait between the start of an agent's sprint, when the chain would come off the shackle, and the end, that moment when the possessive chain would send that charge, that electromagnetic pulse to instantly transform its host from a solid into a spectacle of charged vapor. The Sublimes were quite a thing to behold, and some considered them to be the true heroes in this culture of compliance. Heroes, even though their memory disappeared as quickly as they did. Link considered making a break for it. He wondered if it was insane to think of just leaving now without taking his chain off. Maybe he could determine a way to remove it later. But no. Whether it was fear or reason, he suspected that they would be able to track him no matter where he went, and for that matter, they could probably tell that he was idling right now. He stood and remembered his intent to sweep Smitty's work area. He needed to head back now if that was going to happen today. As he walked the industrial vacuum with him across the desolated flatland, he touched his shackle with his free hand. He did still have some capacity to feel sorry for the women. A man could get by in life with only one arm, but a woman started out with no options if she had a shackle on the neck.
"Lincoln," the blacksmith acknowledged with a nod, as he set a metal rod down on the ground behind him. "You can call me Link, Smitty. Everybody calls me Link." "All right," Smitty told him. "If that's what you'd prefer, then I will. Do you need a sweep today, by the way? You're the last stop on my day's objectives." Smitty looked on either side of his legs, behind the crate on which he sat, and around the side of his anvil. "I wouldn't mind that," he said, standing. As Link swept, agents flooded the near background. It was time for every worker to check in at the depository to give an account of the day's work. "You have 2 chains," Smitty remarked. Link paused briefly without looking up and continued sweeping. "Was I not supposed to say that?" Smitty asked. "You have a chain around your neck. I only ever see female agents wearing chains." Link tugged the collar of his shirt to hide the chain. "Have I said something wrong?" Smitty asked. "I don't understand." Link looked up and he saw Smitty's wrist. No. He saw both of Smitty's wrists. "You don't have one," Link whispered. "At all. How have I never noticed?" Smitty held up his hands. "Guess I'm usually in long sleeves. I'm a freelance agent," he explained. "There's a steady need for my services, but he doesn't require the same commitment of me that he does of those who are officially under the chain of command. I make the tools that the agents use, but honestly, I can be replaced at any time." "So you're here because you want to be?" Link asked, looking down again as he swept. "To start with, I was here because I couldn't find work anyplace else, but now I'm here because I want to be." Link nodded, as if he understood. Smitty shifted his weight. "This is not a perfect way to live," he added. "The system needs reform." Link looked at his face, then back down at the dust. "You believe that?" "I do," said Smitty, lowering his voice. "You believe it too." Link had learned to control which expressions appeared on his face, but he had not learned to keep his face from changing color. Even as the blood stirred in his cheeks, he recognized that he was exposed. Someone else knew now. Link finished his sweep and told Smitty to have a good night. Now that the rush was over, he went to the depository to clock out. He removed his chain from the broom he was carrying and connected it to the left side plug on the column that stood between the depository pits. "Lincoln," the column said, in a highly processed electronic voice, "does this chain bear the full account of the day's work?" "Yes, yes, always yes," Link whined. "This was a low-performance day in your career, Lincoln," said the column. A new agent, a female with thick brown hair, had only then knelt to log her own day's work, and Link couldn't see her entire face. She had cautiously attached her chain to the right side plug on the column, and when she heard the words that it had spoken to Link, she gave him a nervous, questioning look, as if to ask if they needed to run. "It's no problem," Link whispered, cracking a smile. "I hear that every single day, and I've been here a while. It's hard to quantify custodial labor." She looked only slightly relieved. As the column began to process the young woman's workday through the right side speaker, the left speaker continued with some processing sounds that reminded Link of the fax machines he used to see in childhood. He'd always hated everything about fax machines, and he had a similar relationship with this column. At last, the mechanized beast spoke again, this time in the perfectly clear pre-recorded voice of the overseer. "You can do better tomorrow. I believe in you." The brown-haired girl still looked unnerved, and now she looked confused as well. "Yep," Link said. "There's one you'll be hearing every day. You'll have to get used to that, I'm afraid." In a moment, the column repeated this exact phrase to her, and only then released her chain from the plug. She lifted a hand toward Link, gently and automatically, as if without thought, as if it were to be assumed that one agent would help another off the ground. "Oh," Link said. "I'm sorry, we're not supposed to... Did they tell you everything at orientation?" She seemed frightened, as though she had crossed a line. And yet her face had not at all changed to send such a signal. Link wondered how the impression had entered his mind. "Can you speak?" Link asked her quietly, and she answered even more quietly. "At orientation, I was told that we weren't allowed to talk." She shoved the ground and stood on her feet. With fine fingers, she brushed the hair out of her face. She had dusky blue eyes that made him want to stop the darkness from coming. Link said, and he said it again. And finally, "Oh, no, we're allowed to talk. It's skin-on-skin touch that's not allowed. The human body has a lot of energy going on inside it. We're not machines, but we're all electric. We're all magnetic. So, circuitry overloads, magnetic instability. Yeah, it can cause explosions." She looked in the direction of the morning's fireworks and nodded gravely. "What's your name?" he asked, suddenly short of breath. "Pearl," What's yours? Lincoln. Call me Link, though. Thanks for talking to me, Link, she said in a sweet, subdued voice. I hope I'll see you around. You will, he answered. You won't be able to avoid me, I'm afraid. She let out a quiet laugh and studied his face, and one moment passed almost indiscernibly into the next. So, Link said, what they may have explained poorly was the policy on agent relationships. I think that's why you thought we couldn't speak. The Overseer requires a focus on the mission above all else, so he doesn't allow romantic bonds among agents. Not really a dating scene here to speak of. And you won't find any weddings on the weekends, and there's definitely no families. Again with the impressions. This time he received the distinct impression that he had just broken something of hers, and he hoped against hope that it hadn't been her hope. She did not look prepared to be here. He hoped for her sake that she would learn to look prepared. What a day. Link laid his satchel down in his personal quarters and looked over at the small pile that had been deposited on his cleaning station. Link was not permitted a lock on his door. No one was. And the one big drawback within his simple job description was that he wasn't given a choice about when his workday could really end. I better get this stuff done. He snatched his satchel up and hid it under the bed. He pulled his blanket down enough that it would just reach the floor for full coverage. What are the damages tonight? Hey, Link! Let me tell you what I have here for you to work on tonight. It was the Overseer, looming in the door, like a boss. Oh, I didn't expect to see you tonight, said Link, hoping to convey a cordial unwelcoming. The Overseer spread out his long arms. Surprise, he said, and he broke into a goofy chuckle. There's not much here to do, to really tell you the truth. One of the morning's sublimes left a pair of boots behind. Are these cobalt? I thought these were still in testing. Secret testing, yes. One of the rifters she is doing the full tests on one set of it. Those tests have been going well, so we've been introducing just the boots to a few different agents. Not the full body gear, though. Well, anyway, who told you about the full body gear, Link? The Overseer laughed and then fell silent. He gazed, a depthless gaze, onto Link's eyes. Marilyn mentioned it, but I only know that there was a proposal. I know nothing of the technology. The Overseer nodded and sighed. She's supposed to know not to do that, not to mention proposals, is what I mean. That's why they're proposals, because there has not been a decision made. I think it will be fine this time. But I hope I can trust your discretion with the things you hear in the future. Of course you can, Link answered as he handled one of the cobalt boots. He analyzed the shredded interior fabric and inspected the blackened blood stains across the outer surface, especially the caked blood within the fine ridges. I only brought up the full body armor because I knew it was your thing. I really wouldn't have a reason to tell anyone else. That's the spirit, the Overseer said with a smile on his stupid lips. You're a quality agent, Link. Will you be able to get through all this cleaning detail tonight? Link winced and met the Overseer's eyes. I hope so, he answered. I'll try to. It's the staining that you see here. That's what's going to take me most of the night to get out. And when I'm done with them, you'll want to get someone to recloth it. That's true, I will want that, said the Overseer, because I'm going to let these be yours if you want them. Huh? Would you want cobalt boots? I hope you would like having them. I would. They're not thigh-highs, but these would still help me a lot. Maybe I'll get you some thigh-highs, said the Overseer. But these for now. All right, Link, you know where I am if you need me. I'll let you into my room any time of the day and night. With one hand raised, he saw himself out, knocked his tall head on the doorway, and disappeared, at least for now. Link knew that that wasn't really true, what he'd said about any time of the day and night. The Overseer wasn't nearly so available. On any given night, He could be out developing his omnipresent skills, drifting from room to room in the nearby compound, watching the female agent sleep, and occasionally watching the male agent sleep. Equal opportunity employer. Link closed the door and closed his eyes to listen. He heard the overseer's unsteady steps as he tumbled awkwardly down the hall to his room like a dizzy bipedal giraffe, welcoming with abandon the most challenging stages of puberty. The overseer's door opened and closed. Link hoped that he would hear the footsteps, if there were any more coming tonight. But then he remembered just how hard they would be to miss, and for the first time, he took comfort in that truth. He sat on his bed and grabbed his satchel out from underneath, opened the flap, and looked down at the hand, the shackle, and the chain. Where do I even begin? He began with a distance test. Although it seemed basic, it was no less troubling in its execution. He left the chain in the satchel, in front of his bed, and he held the shackle in his hands as he took slow steps back across the floor. He watched for the 3 tiny lights to wake up, wondering if they were even able to turn on once their host had been cut off from them. Halfway across the room, all 3 lights went red. It came not in a blink, blink, blink sequence, but all at once. They awoke at full brightness and blinked with urgency. Link almost dropped the shackle, and in spite of wobbly knees, he carried it swiftly back to the satchel and ran back to the other side of the room to observe it. The lights were no longer emitting such an intense red. They were dimming, but still lit. Link wondered if he'd really seen what he thought he'd seen in that moment of panic. It had looked very much like the bag had been crawling toward him, even as he ran the shackle to the satchel. His primary concern was to remain outside of the explosion radius if the chain proved aggravated, but now he was also concerned about that hand. Surely the system didn't have so much influence over the agents that even their disembodied limbs would be physically drawn to reunite with their shackles. Surely no man's hand made a move without an integrated head to govern the decision. He hoped not. As he regained confidence to be near the shackle and chain, he crossed the room and sat with the bag. He lifted the shackle, opened the flap, and decided on his next experiment. He fitted the shackle back onto its hand. Then he reintegrated the chain to the shackle. What really happens when one agent touches another? Link placed his hand into the agent's old one and gave a little handshake. "Hi, I'm Link," he said. "We haven't properly met." Then he realized it was near certain that they had indeed met. Link worked around everyone. This hand had been a part of a real person. This was a part that person had had to say goodbye to have his freedom. For a moment, Link burned with resolve to keep this hand, to preserve it as something holy. Then, almost immediately, he was overwhelmed with an understanding that the only honorable course of action was to bury it. He could not keep this. It could never be his to keep. He would bury it before the first work bell, in the morning. Whoever this guy was, he had had a right-hand shackle, just like Link did. Link thought it foolish to find a sense of camaraderie in that, but his heart felt tender for the first time in quite a very long time, in ways that begged for a rationale. He tried to remember the last time that anyone had shaken his hand, but he couldn't remember. He tried, and he couldn't even remember. Probably the overseer had shaken his hand, but that didn't count. He probably shook Link's hand on the regular. Link wouldn't know, because he'd become skilled at blocking their interactions from his mind. Link was finding it harder and harder to acknowledge that creature as a real person, in spite of the heavy-handed charisma that he exuded. With his right hand, Link gripped the agent's hand tightly, like they were real brothers. Indeed, the scent of dried, stale death arose from the hand, but not pungently, and the scent was certainly not the part that overwhelmed him. Tears pricked his eyes. His stomach felt dense with grief, and his shoulders began shaking.
he was about to break. And it had been so long since he had cried. He was concerned that he'd forgotten how to do it quietly. With his left hand, Link pulled his necklace up from his shirt and held his padlock, his silver padlock, with the word "hardened" engraved in all caps at the top of the loop, the one that seemed like it should feel heavier than it did these days, the one that didn't have a key anymore. Link awoke in deepest night. On the floor, his padlock was exposed. He was holding a handful of an amputee's leftovers. His heart raced as he realized that anyone could have walked in, and that the overseer was the most likely one to have done so, at least in terms of proximity. He stood and blinked and turned his head back and forth, gathering a sense of what still needed to be done before morning. He took a step toward the boots, then turned back and packaged the escaped agent's secret items into their secret sack and stowed it back under the bed. It took Link 10 minutes to give the boots a really immaculate cleaning. Actually, they looked amazing. They needed to be serviced by a loom worker, but he was looking forward to wearing them after that. He washed his hands over the deep sink and rubbed his tear-stained face with hot water. He washed his padlock as well and buffed it with a white towel until it was dried and shining. There was still time to go back to bed, so he did. And as he lay beneath his blanket, he considered the bag that lay beneath his bed. The handshake had not spooked the circuitry at all. He'd even forgotten to be careful, because none of the danger signs had been present, at all. The lights hadn't even come on. Not once did they come on. The no-touch rule had no basis. Or if it did, that basis was not the rationale that they were being fed. In any case, he could have taken Pearl's hand, and now he wished he had. This concludes the audio preview of Jeremy Loomis's sci-fi dystopia, The Bonding Agent, releasing for free download between 7/7/14 and 7/14/14. Good listening today, everyone, but you can do better tomorrow. I believe.